Hi. So in this video, we're gonna discuss strategic moves. And to start with the definition, the term strategic moves stands for the entire scope of techniques players can use in order to manipulate rules of the game. So basically, each time any of the players uses strategic moves, the structure of the entire game is subject to change. So as we're gonna discuss in this video, this is associated with changing the type of the game. So then instead of one-time simultaneous moves game, we deal with sequential moves game. Okay, so in order to work, strategic moves have to be observable and irreversible. So observable means that all the players are aware of the fact that structure of the game was changed, and irreversibility means that neither of the players can, turn the game back to its initial form after a strategic move was introduced, applied, whatever. So let's discuss it based on my favorite pop culture example, Doctor Strangelove movie of 1964. So the setting was like this. United States developed a Doomsday device. So something which can destroy the entire Soviet Union. And even though it was not approved by US government, some of the military authorities decided to initiate this program. And Soviet authorities also had a Doomsday device. So some nuclear bomb that would make life on the entire Earth impossible for the next 100 years. So obviously it would be bad for Soviet Union and it would be bad for the rest of the world because Soviet Doomsday device was to destroy everything, any biological life. So the idea was like this. United States announced publicly, I think there was some article published in a very famous newspaper, I do not remember exactly. So anyway, they announced publicly that they have Doomsday device. So take it or leave it. Do not try to mess up with us, because if you try, we will just apply our Doomsday device. Soviet Union did not do the same. So actually it was a joke, that Soviet government was so paranoid about everything, so they decided to wait to announce that they've developed a Doomsday device, and it was too late. So this is the idea. So this is about observability of the strategic moves. So this is the entire idea behind having a Doomsday device. You do not want to explode it. Exploding Doomsday device is bad for you and it's bad for the rest of the world. However, if it's observable, if other countries know that you have a Doomsday device, no one even tries to mess up with you. And in case of US government, probably US government would take more control over, this entire military machine if they would be aware that Soviet Union has a Doomsday device. However, this never happened, and as the result, it was bad for everyone. So the bomb exploded, and everyone suffered as the result of this. Which wouldn't happen if Soviet Union, make its strategic moves observable. Irreversibility. So another feature of strategic move visible in this example. So the idea was like this. Soviet Union had no control over Doomsday device. So it was to register any invasion automatically and explode automatically. We will discuss this in a couple of minutes, in this video, why control over Doomsday device might destroy the entire idea behind Doomsday device. But speaking informally, it's like this. Okay, so there is an invasion, obviously it's bad for us. But between trying to cope with the consequences of US invasion and destroying all the life on the earth, probably we would choose to cope with the consequences of US invasion and not to destroy everything. So this is the idea. If it's reversible, so you can play the game back to its initial form at any moment, it makes no sense. So here the entire idea was behind automatic explosion. So once there is invasion from US or any other countries, but basically US because it was, 64, Cold War and all the stuff. So once there is some invasion, explosion occurs automatically and without any intervention from our side. We are not in charge for this anymore. We cannot control this. So please keep this in mind when trying to mess up with us. Okay, again, as I said, we will get back to the structure of this game in a moment once we introduce some concepts and techniques when it comes to strategic moves. Okay, so this is Battle of Sexes. As we discussed, there are multiple Nash equilibria in pure strategies. So one of the methods, to solve this game somehow, to have one outcome, either hockey or theater, players can either mix their strategies, so assign some probabilities to going to theater or going to see hockey, or another option is strategic move. So for instance, if any of the players somehow manages to persuade other player that he or she will choose only one option, then we have only one equilibrium in this game. So for instance, wife can say, I will go to the theater. I do not care what you decide to do. Even if I end up in theater lonely and sad, I will decide to go theater anyway. So I will never ever go to see hockey. I hate this. So basically it's up to you, like take it or leave it, I will go to the theater. So then the structure of the game is different, if husband knows for sure that wife will always choose to go to the theater regardless of his strategy, then actually it makes sense for him to go to the theater as well. So then he will get 1 instead of 0 payoff. So this is the idea. Another thing is credibility of this commitment. So it will work only if wife has a reputation of the tough player. Player who always sticks to her commitment. Then actually husband will believe that she goes to the theater even if it hurts her in case he decides to go to see hockey. And yeah, so then the outcome of this game will be like this. Theater. So we will get back to this at the end of this video. I mean, the methods of how you can achieve credibility. I mean, how you can make other players believe that you will stick to your commitment. But nevertheless, if we assume that wife is a credible player who always sticks to her commitments, and husband has the reason to believe her when she says she decides to go to the theater anyway. So, yeah, if all of those assumptions are maintained, we end up here. Okay, when discussing strategic moves, we have to distinguish between conditional and unconditional moves. So, when it comes to unconditional moves, as the name suggests, no condition is specified. So basically, you can interpret it like this. I will do something regardless of what you decide to do. Take it or leave it. Like here, I will go to the theater regardless of what you decide to do. Even if I am sure that you will decide to go and see hockey, I will go to the theater anyway. Because for me, going to the theater, even if it's associated with some lower utility than I would have if I go to see hockey with you, is more important. I am a tough player. I will go to the theater. When it comes to conditional commitments, conditional strategic moves, some conditions have to be met. So simple commitment, that I'm going to do something is not enough in this case. So you can interpret it like this. I will do this or that depending on what you decide to do. Like if you choose A, I choose B. If you choose X, I will choose Y. So obviously the possible actions and their consequences have to be specified. So we will get back to conditional strategic moves a bit later, And first, I would like to discuss unconditional strategic moves. Okay, so let's discuss it based on the chicken game. So as you remember, two guys can go either straight or they can swerve. The one who goes straight is a winner on the condition the other player decides to swerve. If both of them swerve or turn out to be chickens, then they have just zero utility. And if they go straight, they prove they are both brave enough. However, probably they will end up with hospital, they will destroy their cars. So we think that going straight and having an accident is worse than swerving and turn out to be a chicken. So again, this is another example of the game with multiple Nash equilibria if there is no commitment. However, assume that James actually makes a commitment. So James tells the dean that he is going to go straight regardless of what is going to happen. The reasonable question is how to make Dean believe that James will go straight regardless of what is going to happen. So one of the solutions in this game is just restricting the freedom of act. So James can make sure that he will never ever be able to swerve. But of course, this is going to work only on the condition that Dean will believe him. So in this case, remember about two features of a good strategic move. It has to be observable and it has to be irreversible. So in this case, James can, for instance, break his driving wheel, in front of Dean's eyes, just throw it to the window. So in this case, of course, James will be unable to swerve, and obviously it's irreversible move. And if it happens in front of Dean's eyes, then it will be observable for Dean. So Dean will have all the reasons to believe James, and actually keep in mind that James has no ability to swerve. Another case is just climbing on the roof of the car, which was a case in one of the old movies, not the Rebel with no cause, because this original game is from, but some later movie. I do not remember, to be honest. So this is example of the bad strategic move. This is from Crybaby of 1990. So they also played the chicken game, and they both decided to climb the roof of the car, but the only problem is that some other person drives at the same time. So basically it makes no sense. Probably it looks effective, but in this version of this game, again, it makes no sense, unlike the older movie. So basically, it just proves that the person responsible for the plot was really bad in game theory. So what I mean is that in this case, the strategic move is a very stupid move. It makes no sense because, again, other person is driving. So by climbing the roof, you do not restrict your freedom of the act by any way. Okay, here is another example of how restricting freedom of act make commitments more reliable, and this is something we discussed at the very beginning, but based on a slightly different example. Okay, so assume that big hostile country can choose between invading to the small peaceful country or not invading at all. And small peaceful country authorities announced that if big hostile country invades, all the roads, bridges, basically infrastructure will be exploded. And the question is whether this commitment is credible. And the answer is no, it's not. So take a look. If invasion actually happens, then small peaceful country can decide between exploding everything, then it's bad for big hostile country and it's also bad for the small peaceful country, or not exploding anything. So then big hostile country actually invades to the rich country with good infrastructure and gets 100, And for small peaceful country, this option is actually better than exploding everything. Because, what happened already happened. So maybe it's better idea to try to live in your reality under occupation of the big hostile country, which is not nice, it provides some disutility, -20 payoff, but still better than exploding and ruining the entire country. So then it's obvious, then small peaceful country will decide not to explode and big hostile country will decide to invade, so we actually end up here. However, there is a solution. You can make this explosion automatic. So, it's not up to you whether to explode or not to explode. It is just to happen automatically, as it was in the example with Soviet Doomsday machine from Doctor Strangelove movie. So if it happens automatically, then, there is no choice except of exploding, because small peaceful country authorities are not in charge of this anymore. They cannot control and they cannot decide whether to explode or not to explode. It just happened automatically. Let's say due to some sophisticated system or whatsoever. I have no idea. It's enough to say it happens automatically. Then, if there is a commitment with automatic fulfillment, we end up here. So big hostile country keeps in mind that explosion will happen anyway, and then utility will be -50, or it cannot invade at all and get 0, which is, as you remember, is a standard payoff when you decide not to do anything, so nothing changes. It is not associated with any losses or gains. So obviously big hostile country will prefer 0 to -50, and we end up here. No invasion, no explosion. So in this case, small peaceful country authorities can achieve this equilibrium, equilibrium in the game with commitment and automatic fulfillment instead of this equilibrium. Because as I said before, if it's up to the authorities whether to explode or not to explode, explosion will never happen. Okay, so this was the idea. So another way to make your commitment more credible is to change the payoff structure. So James can decide to change his payoff structure, for instance by promising that he will do something very humiliating and unpleasant in case he decides to swerve. So then instead of -1 he will get -4. Again, you're a loser and you have to do something humiliating. And instead of 0, in case both players swerve, James will get -3. So again, 0, -3. We just assume that doing something unpleasant and humiliating will decrease James' payoff by 3, regardless of the outcome. So probably James has to make this promise in front of the large audience, just to make this irreversible. Because if this is just a private commitment between James and Dean, Dean has no guarantee that James is actually going to do this unpleasant and humiliating action. In case, again, you simply cannot guarantee this. However, if it happens in front of the large audience, so there are a lot of people who hear James promise to do something humiliating and unpleasant if he decides to swerve, then there is no way back. So this makes this game irreversible. This makes this commitment irreversible. And of course, Dean has to be, among those people, because he has to be aware of the fact that James' payoffs has actually changed. So take a look. Then for James, straight becomes a dominant strategy. So -2 is better than -4. And 1 is better than -3 anyway. It was better before, 1 was better than 0. So it's all about here. So previously, if Dean decides to go straight, for James it was a better option to swerve. But now for James it's still a better option to go straight, whatever happens. So Dean kept this in mind, so he knows that for James, straight is a dominant strategy. So instead of this entire game, we can just cross this out and we are left with this. And then for Dean, obviously, it's better to swerve and get -1 than to go straight and get -2. So again, we end up with this solution when James is a winner and Dean is a loser. So commitment or unconditional strategic move might be a good way to win the chicken game. However, even when it comes to conditional strategic move, it can help you not to lose, or something like this, if it's appropriate thing to say. So I believe it will be better to introduce this example. So this is some schematic depiction of Caribbean crisis of 1962, which happened in October of 1962. So basically, it was a conflict between United States, represented by President Kennedy, and Soviet Union, represented by Secretary of State Khrushchev. And both of them had two options. They could escalate the conflict, and in this case, Cold War turns out to be the New World War, and obviously it's bad for both the parties because, destruction, I don't know, a lot of people will die, so it's unpleasant for both United States and Soviet Union. They can try to resolve the conflict peacefully, and in this case, they would make a conditional strategic move. Like, if you decide to resolve the conflict peacefully and put your hands off the Cuba, I will do the same. So in this case, both of them get just 0. Of course, it would be better for United States to escalate the conflict and take control over Cuba. So, okay, sorry. Actually, it was a typo. Here we are. So escalate the conflict and take the control over Cuba. So then United States get 5 and Soviet Union gets -5, and vice versa. If Soviet Union decides to escalate and United States decide to resolve the conflict peacefully, then Soviet Union takes control over Caribbean region, which is associated with payoff 5, and United States get -5. So as you can guess, this is just an example of chicken game. Structure is pretty the same. So if any of the parties would like to win this game, then this party would have to ensure the other party that it will escalate the conflict anyway. So for instance, United States can make Soviet Union believe that whatever happens, United States will escalate the conflict. Of course, the credibility of this commitment is very questionable, but in order to win this game, Soviet Union would have to do the same. But I think stakes were too high in this particular case. So both parties decided not to make any unconditional commitment, but instead to go for a conditional strategic move. As I mentioned, I will not try to invade Caribbean region as long as you do not try to take control over Caribbean region. And yeah, so basically it was a mutual strategic move. And we ended up here. So both of the parties proclaimed they are not going to try to take any direct control of Cuba. So what I mean is that in order to win chicken game, conditional strategic move is not a good option. So chicken game can be won only if one of the parties decides to go for the unconditional commitment. However, if you are not interested in the victory, instead you're interested in not losing this game, to get at least 0 instead of -5 or -10, conditional commitment might be a good option. Even though, you cannot really explain it under the classical game theory framework, nevertheless, this is how this game ended up, by the means of conditional strategic move, conditional commitment. Okay, so unconditional moves do not work if at least one of the players has a dominant strategy. So let's say, as you remember, we end up here in prisoner's dilemma always. So Nash equilibrium is achieved by the mutual defection strategy. However, let's say one of the players would like to end up here, because obviously 10-10 is better than 5-5. So if player 1 says, listen, regardless of what you decide to do, I will always cooperate, and I expect you to do the same. The second player will just say, great, because if you decide to cooperate, I will just get 15 instead of 5. So for the second player, defection is always a dominant strategy. And even if player 1 decides to make an unconditional commitment, to cooperate always, then, it's just for the good of the second player. It will not help to achieve the cooperative outcome. It will just increase the second player's payoff. So this is the idea. When one of the players has a dominant strategy, unconditional strategic move is not likely to work. Okay. So when it comes to conditional strategic moves, it's always a combination of threat and promise. If you do something, I will be nice to you, and if you do not do something I would like you to do, I will not be nice to you. So if you choose A, I will choose B. If you choose X, I will choose Y. In this case, we distinguish between deterrence and compelling strategies. So deterrence occurs when player 1, like the one who is to undertake the strategic move, would like to prevent the second player from doing something. And compellence occurs when player 1, like the person trying to apply whatever strategic move, tries to induce the other player to do something. So threat. If you do not act as I ask you to act, I will play in the way hurting you. And promise is all about promising to do something nice for the other player if this player acts in line with your expectations. If you act as I asked you to act, I will play in the way benefiting you. So we can analyze conditional moves based on US-Japan trade negotiations, which is from your textbook. And oh my god, it's very old and obsolete because this is not the issue anymore, but nevertheless. Okay, so both countries can decide whether to be open or closed for international trade. It's easy to see that regardless of what United States decide to do, it's always better for Japan to stay closed. So if US is open, then 4 is better than 3. If US is closed, then 2 is better than 1. For United States, it's kind of opposite. So if Japan is open, it's better to stay open for United States. If Japan is closed, it's better to stay open for the United States. So United States has a dominant strategy to stay open. So again, unconditional strategic move will not work in this case, because if United States tells Japan that it will remain open regardless of what Japan decides to do, then actually great, we still end up here at the initial Nash equilibrium. It will not change anything in this game. So in this case, United States can try to introduce some conditional strategic move. And keep in mind, this is Nash equilibrium. So Japan can get 3, 1, 4, or 2, and for Japan, Nash equilibrium corresponds to the best possible outcome. This is not true for United States, because United States gets 3, and United States could get 4. So what I mean is that Japan has no incentives to apply any kind of strategic moves, but United States actually has some incentives. So take a look. What can United States do in this case? United States can tell Japan, listen, if you stay open, I promise to stay open. Like, of course, this is not very nice for you, but because then you will get 3 instead of 4. But I can do something worse. If you decide to stay closed, I will stay closed, and then you will get 2. So by going for my proposition, you can get 3, and if you reject my suggestion, not my suggestion, but proposition, okay, whatever, proposal, proposition, yes, proposal. And if you accept my proposal, you will get 3. If you reject my proposal, you will get 2. So the idea is that there is something to threat the Japan with. Because obviously, Japan has no reason to be open. It makes no sense. Because Japan has already achieved the best possible outcome. However, if United States can make Japan even worse, then it's a good idea to go for a slightly worse proposal than to end up here. So what I mean is that Japan is not really willing to change 4 to 3. However, keeping in mind that it can be even worse and that Japan will get only 2 at the payoff, then it starts to make sense. Okay, speaking formally, if United States make no conditional move, then we end up here. Open, closed. This is equilibrium. However, if United States makes a proposal, if you are open, I am open. If you are closed, I am closed. And, this is a credible commitment or credible promise. To be more precise, it's a credible combination of threat and promise. Then Japan can choose between being open and getting 3 and being closed and getting 2. So obviously it's better for Japan to be open, and get 3. And then this is our Nash equilibrium. So instead of this equilibrium in one-time simultaneous moves game, which is here, we get this equilibrium. So there is one important thing to underline in this case, is that, just to recall, if you stay open, I stay open. If you closed, I am closed. So Japan can say, okay, if you are closed and I am closed, then it's not good for you. I do not believe that you would like to be closed and get 1 instead of 3. This is irrational. It makes no sense. You will never do this. So that's why I do not believe you, and I will not decide to go open. So in this case, reputation of the United States is a crucial thing here. So if US has some, credible, reliable reputation of the player who always sticks to its commitment, then it will work. If someone has a reputation of the player who always follows its commitments, then Japan will actually believe United States. However, if United States is believed to be a rational player, player who always choose the best possible payoff, then it makes no sense. Because in this case, in fact, United States promises to do something which will hurt both Japan and the United States, of going close instead of going open. Then, of course, Japan will get 2, but at the same time, United States will get 1 instead of 3. So this is the idea. That's why actually in international negotiations, a lot of countries, not countries like governments, authorities, whatever, follow irrational strategies. This is all done for the sake of building reputation of the reliable player. Probably irrational player, a player who can hurt both himself and other players for the sake of being credible and for the sake of sticking to its commitment. Okay, sorry. I was discussing government, but then I just tried to humanize the players. So keep in mind that conditional moves are also not a uniform solution. So we can recall the game Battle of Sexes, and basically it's obvious for both the players that other players will choose the same option as her spouse. So if wife says something like this: I go to the theater if you go to the theater, and I go to the hockey if you go to see hockey, it just makes no sense. It's obvious. It just follows the structure of this game. So basically, in this case, a conditional strategic move will not change the structure of the game, and basically, it will not change anything. It simply makes no sense. So before we distinguished between two broad methods to gain credibility of commitment or credibility of unconditional move, and one of them was reducing freedom of actions. So this can be done by automatic fulfillment, delegation, burning bridges, and cutting off communication. So when it comes to automatic fulfillment, we already discussed this based on the big hostile and small peaceful country example. So if you introduce automatic fulfillment of your threat, like again, explosion will occur automatically, then it makes you more credible, because as I mentioned before, normal people are really unlikely to do something radical in this situation. Because living under occupation, it's unpleasant, but still better than destroying everything in the country. So that's why automatic fulfillment will just make this commitment more credible. Delegation. It's simply when you delegate some other parties the obligation to fulfill your commitment. And in this case, you can think about NATO membership. Let's hypothesize just for a second then Russia decides to invade in Poland. So in this case, something, as I mentioned before, is likely to occur. It's still better to live under Russian occupation than to be engaged in the war with much bigger and much more hostile country for Poland. So in this case, Poland can delegate the right to fight to NATO, North Atlantic, whatever organization, as far as I remember correctly. So NATO does not really care about consequences of the war for Poland. It's, in this case, if NATO is not really interested and not really affected by the adverse consequences of war in Poland, it makes this commitment more credible, yeah? Because in this case, probably Polish authorities will decide not to mess up, and just give up. But NATO membership ensures that this entire organization will not give up. They do not give up. They do not care about what happens in Poland. As the result, how many people die and what is the degree of destruction. They simply do their job. So again, it makes it more credible, Burning bridges is another technique. Is simply when you reduce your own freedom of actions by destroying any opportunity to play the game back. And literally, it was a case in many wars when invading army just burned the bridges, to make sure that there is no way back, and the only thing they can do is to invade the country and occupy this country. And cutting off communication is basically about cutting off communication. Think about Battle of Sexes game. So if wife calls the husband and says, I am in the theater, I will go to the theater, and so on and so forth, I bought the tickets or whatsoever, then husband can try to communicate with her and, try to persuade her to go to hockey. However, if she just sends a message, I am in the theater, like take it or leave it, and, switches off the phone, then there is no way for the husband to try to persuade her to go to see hockey with him. So, yeah, this is what cutting off communication technique is all about. So when it comes to changes payoffs, one of the methods is building a reputation. So basically, if James has a reputation of the very tough guy, and he really values the fact he has this reputation, then he cannot simply goes and swerve, because swerving will be associated with some reputational losses for him. Okay, basically it's perfectly depicted in this game, but before I introduce some example of unpleasant and humiliating action. But in this case, if James has some reputation and Dean has no reputation, then for James, the losses associated with swerving and being a chicken are much higher than for Dean. Because, reputation is a very valuable asset. So probably due to his reputation, James can, I don't know, he does not have to fight as much as Dean because he has a reputation and everyone is afraid of him. He gets some free beer or whatsoever. So for James, losing his reputation is much more hurtful than for Dean. That's why the payoffs of James are different. And as a result, this equilibrium is achieved. Okay, irrationality. As we discussed based on the example of United States and Japan, Japan might not believe the combination of threat and promise made by the United States because, again, being closed for United States is also associated with some losses. So in this case, United States will get only 1 instead of 4 or even 3. So if you are known as the rational player, this might really undermine the reliability of your promises and threats. Like, no one will ever believe that you will hurt yourself, and that's why, again, your threats are simply not credible. So in this case, having a reputation of the irrational player, like acting as the irrational player before, in the way which hurt both you and other players, might be a good asset actually. So it will make your commitments more credible. Not commitment. What I mean is that your threats more credible. Okay, brinkmanship. Again, we can get back to this example. So this threat is too strong. So Japan might simply not believe that United States will go for such a radical action. And again, it simply undermined this. So in this case, United States might say, listen, I'm not really gonna hurt you, but if you remain closed, it might deteriorate relationships between our countries. So probably in the future, when Congress decides to vote for some legislation which might potentially hurt you, it will do so. Because, again, why to do this? You refuse to cooperate. It makes no sense. So in this case, it's not that threatening. So the adverse consequences are not that unpleasant, and at the same time, it makes them more reliable. Okay, very stupid example. I don't know, if someone promises never ever communicate with you and hurt you in any possible way and so on, you would probably not trust this person, because it's too strong. It's not worth it. It will be unpleasant both for you and this person. That's why this person is not likely to go for this option. However, if you are told that probably in the future when you need my help, I will refuse to do this, and who knows, maybe it will be very, very important for you. So again, it's less threatening, but at the same time, it sounds much more reliable. So this is the idea behind brinkmanship. And finally, there are several common techniques to countering the opponent's strategic moves, or basically what to do if other player decides to apply some strategic move against you. So one of them is irrationality. So in this case, when we discussed chicken game, we assumed that Dean is irrational and a nice guy who will never decide to lose 2 instead of losing 1, and that's why he will decide to swerve. But in this case, if Dean turns out to be an irrational person and James is aware of this fact, then it just loses any sense. So again, if you assume that a James is a tough guy with credible commitments who can simply hurt himself, just for the sake of winning this game, then it works. But if you have two players of the same type, I think not really. So yeah. So basically, yeah, your rationality might be a good way to make your commitments credible, and it can be a good way to counter other players' strategic moves. Cut enough communication. So as we discussed, a good strategic move has to be irreversible and observable for both the players. And if you cut off any communication and you refuse to receive any signals from other players, then for them strategic moves make no sense. So in this case, you limit your information on purpose, and of course you have to announce it in public so other players would be aware of the fact you do not receive their signals. And in this case, for them, strategic moves might make no sense. So this is how it works. Leaving escape routes open. Again, strategic move has to be irreversible. So if you ensure other players that you have nothing against rolling this game to its initial form, they might have a temptation to do so. So this is what it is all about. Undermining opponent's motive to uphold his reputation. So let's say in this game, James might be afraid of losing his reputation of the tough guy, and that's why he will never ever decide to swerve. So Dean might try to talk to James and persuade him that Dean will not tell anyone if James decides to go swerve. It makes no sense for Dean. So basically, yeah. Then for James, going swerve will not be associated with such huge reputational losses, because Dean will ensure him that it's not for his interest to tell everyone that James is a chicken, and this entire game rolls back to its initial form. And finally, salami tactics. So salami tactics was called in this way because it's very similar to cutting huge piece of salami into small thin pieces. And basically it's all about violating the condition of promise and threat, but just a little bit. So let's say Japan would say, okay, I believe you, so I will decide to stay open if it's nice with you, and United States will be just satisfied with such an outcome of the game. And salami tactics is all about changing this state to this state, but very, very gradually. So Japan would introduce very small pieces of legislation, for, closing the economy, like not radical restriction on trade, but like small gradual restrictions. Okay, like we can have open international trade, it's fine, but you will all agree that it should not be related to agricultural products, because we are very caretaking about our agricultural products producers. So we do not want to hurt them. Like, please, like this is the only exception. Maybe still should also be an exception, and so on and so forth. You see, like salami, very small thin pieces of salami, until eventually you achieve this state. Okay, so that was it, and thank you for watching.